Today, I'll be presenting uh, breast cancer beyond luminal types. So, this is, in nutshell, we'll be discussing about the triple negative breast cancer and what are the subtypes of triple negative. So, this was a famous paper by Peru et al., which was uh, published as letter to editor in Nature in 2000, way back in 2000, which classified breast cancers into 4 subtypes. Namely, luminal type, luminal meaning morphologically the cell resembled the luminal cell of a breast duct. So it was luminal A, which was ER positive with a very high PR, which is more than 20%. To negative Ki67 less than 20%. That means it was not such a proliferative tumor, and they stayed positive with keratin 8 and 18. Similarly, there was luminal B, which was ER positive, PR not so high, that is PR less than 20%, but these tumors were more proliferative. Ki67 was more than 20%, and again HER2 negative. Then the second subtype was HER2 enriched. Then they were further subclassified as HER2 enriched and luminal HER2. So HER2 enriched means ER/PR was negative, and in luminal HER2, ER/PR was positive along with HER2 positivity. The third one was, I would say, first the normal breast type. So this was about 10% of all the sample he studied. This is about 10%, which had more of basal subtype genes and no luminal type genes. But the significance of this type is not known. It has not been well studied. And the fourth one, our topic for discussion today, is the basal type. So basal means the morphology, the cell resembles the basal myoepithelial cell of a breast duct. So these were ER/PR negative, HER2 negative, stained positively with keratin 5 and 6, and with usually a very high Ki67. Clinically or pathologically, there are some features where it gives you a hint that this may be a triple negative breast cancer. So clinically, it is usually a young age group, young patient. It has large rounded tumor. These are usually very proliferative tumors. So they grow to large rounded size. Then they are aggressive tumors. Usually the recurrence rates in these tumors are much more than the luminal subtypes, which are ER/PR positive, and they have more of visceral and metastasis in liver or brain or lungs. On radiology, again, it's a hyperdense mass, round or oval, with circumscribed or indistinct margin, usually circumscribed margins. No calcifications are seen. 18% may be occult, and there's a characteristic rim enhancement on MRI. Pathologically, they are high-grade tumors with necrotic zone in the center. TNBC is a very heterogeneous subgroup of breast cancer. It's like saying that it's like something we don't know about. We know the other three, and whatever we don't know about is triple negative breast cancer. So it itself has many subtypes. Many groups classify these this unknown subset. Vanderbilt, Baylor, French. So Vanderbilt had 7 subtypes like basal-like 1, which basal-like 1 was the tumors which were BRCA positive, as in they had. Similarly, Baylor classification was like basal-like, which was immunosuppressed, basal-like, which was immune activated, mesenchymal, and again luminal androgen. And the French classification had 3 types: C1, C2, C3. C1 was luminal androgen type, C2 was basal-like. So if I say in a nutshell, there are 4 basic types of triple negative breast cancers at present. One is basal-like, immune-mediated luminal androgen receptor type, and fourth one is mesenchymal and mesenchymal stem. So I'm going to discuss each one of them in this order, and amount of research or amount of new avenues we have is also in this order. We have maximum basal-like followed by immune-mediated luminal receptor androgen type, and we know the least about the mesenchymal subtype. So I'll start with the basal-like. So BRCA or BRCA1 and 2, these are basically a DNA damage response pathway. Whenever there are double stranded breaks, it takes care of a DNA damage by means of homologous recombination pathway. So whenever there is a single stranded break, the DNA gets repaired by the PAR, polyadenosine PAR enzyme repairs the PARP pathway repairs the single nick on the DNA. When the single nick duplicates and it becomes the nick is both the it's taken care of by HR pathway, and HR pathway is in turn governed by the BRCA gene. Now the ATR pathway is an upstream pathway of PARP-BRCA gene, which I'll just tell you maybe in the next slide. Now BRCA mutation can be inherited. That is, patient had one normal copy of BRCA gene and one was abnormal. And later on as the patient grows, the second copy is also lost, and both the copies are lost. The patient becomes has BRCA mutation. Somatic type. In somatic type, both the copies are normal, but in due course of time, both the copies get mutated. So that's a somatic type of BRCA mutation, which is not inherited. It's seen the incidence is 15 to 30% across all the studies in triple negative breast cancer. So this is the concept I was trying to bring to you. This is the concept of synthetic lethality. Now, if there is a single damage or a single nick or a single break in the DNA, poly-ADP ribose polymerase takes care of it, right? So now consider under any circumstance, due to any condition, PARP is not working. So this single stranded DNA break will replicate, and but into a double stranded DNA, but will be taken care of by homologous recombination pathway. So the cell will survive. Whether it's a cancer cell or normal cell, the cell is going to survive. But when the PARP is not working and the HR is going to die. So what I mean to say is, suppose we give a PARP inhibitor in a normal patient who has a normal HR pathway, it's not going to help. It's not going to function because single strand break, even if it gets converted to double strand break, there's nothing there to repair it in the cell. Hence the cell will die. So this is the mechanism of action of PARP inhibitors, which have been recently approved by FDA in the treatment of metastatic breast cancer. And similarly, I just spoke about ATR. Now what PARP is to HR pathway, ATM is to ATR pathway, except for it's a upstream pathway. It's one step above the PARP and HR pathway. However, the relation is the same. No molecules yet have comparative, and the progression-free survival was in favor of olaparib, 7 months versus 4.2 months. And BRCA trial, similar setting, but the drug was talazoparib, and the PFS again was in favor of talazoparib, 8.6 versus 5.6 months. These two trials, the FDA gave approval to both these drugs in metastatic breast cancer, BRCA positive breast cancer in 2018, in the latter half of 2018. But the story is not over here. There is more to it. That is, as the patient starts to take PARP inhibitors, gradually there is restoration of BRCA protein. BRCA protein gets restored, and again the HR pathway becomes functional. But this concept has brought into light another concept, which is, if we can inhibit HR pathway in patients who have restored or who have developed resistance to PARP inhibitors, we can also induce HR inhibition in normal patients. In any breast cancer patient, we can induce HR inhibition. So this would be a state of induced BRCA-ness. So that means the reason to do this will be that if each and every patient can take advantage of PARP inhibitor. This is a future avenue under research right now. No such drug has come out, but it's an active area of research. So this was one half of the basal-like subtype of the triple negative breast cancer. The second half is the sensitivity to carboplatin. So this is a TNT study, which again randomized triple negative breast cancer, stratified them according to BRCA positivity, BRCA1 or BRCA2. Sample size was 376. Randomized to single agent was used, carboplatin XAUC and docetaxel 100 mg per meter square. So what they saw, when all comers were considered, then there was no difference in survival. That is, if you see BRCA 1 and 2 unmutated, In the carboplatin arm, survival was 28.1 months. In the docetaxel arm, it was 26.6 months, and it was not significant. But when carboplatin was given to subset of patients who were BRCA positive, the result was favorable in favor of carboplatin. These are older studies which did not consider BRCA testing during their enrollment. They showed that when carboplatin is added to the chemotherapy arm, any of the chemotherapies arm, it shows better survival in patients with basal-like triple-negative breast cancer. In the JEPA-6 trial, this trial came in 2014, and later in 2018, they did a secondary analysis of the samples to see how many of them were BRCA mutated, how many were wild type. They showed 61.5% were BRCA mutated and 50.8% were wild type. And they also showed people who responded, the patients who responded to carboplatin had more of BRCA mutated gene in them. So this brings us to a very important question, which is routinely asked in most of the exams, is when to get a genetic testing done. Now, conventionally, we say that when a breast cancer is diagnosed less than 45 years of age, TNBC less than 60 years of age, familial history of breast and ovarian cancer, or a simultaneous breast and ovarian cancer in the same patient, or male breast cancer. But since the FDA has approved PARP inhibitors, and after this TNT trial, which shows carboplatin is more sensitive in BRCA positive patients, this has again brought this into debate that whether it should be offered in all the metastatic breast cancers or not. However, it has not yet been approved for all the cases, but there's a strong recommendation for it. This was the first part of it. Now the immune-mediated triple-negative breast cancers. So whenever there is a cancer cell in the body, and whenever we give any kind of treatment, be it chemotherapy, radiation, or any other kind of treatment, if you're with me at point number 1, so the cancer cell dies and it releases a lot of antigens and proteins. Now, these antigens and proteins are picked up by this green cell, which is the antigen presenting cell. And this antigen presenting cell takes it to the lymph node, where this antigen presenting cell interacts with this blue cell, which is the T cell. And where the T cell acquires the immunity or acquires the capability to fight this antigen. After the T cell has been educated or trained to to be able to fight with these antigens, it moves into the bloodstream and targets the cancer cells where it's located and tries to kill it. This is an ideal setting, but it does not happen like this. So we have two important checkpoints in this pathway due to which this cycle does not function like this. It's very interesting to tell that the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2018 was on the immunotherapy of cancer. I'll tell you the just next 2-3 slides for what this prize was given in 2018. So when the antigen presenting cell is presents to what T cell, presents the antigen to the T cell. This is the antigen presenting cell and this is the T cell. It attaches to it. So this CD80 and CD28 interaction is supposed to take place for adequate exposure of the T cell to the antigen presenting cell. But the immune checkpoint inhibitor, which is CTLA4, that is it's a checkpoint by the body, by the immune system, to avoid excessive activation of the immune system. So this CTLA4 binds to CD80 and inhibits the activation of T cell. So the antigen presenting cell is not able to activate this T cell. Hence, this does not happen. The activation of T cell does not happen. So this is ipilimumab, which blocks CTLA4. Dr. Paul Allison got the Nobel Prize. He shared the Nobel Prize for discovery of the CTLA4 molecule and ipilimumab in 2018. And ipilimumab did wonders in the metastatic melanoma world. It showed survivals which were never seen for last 10 years, progression-free survival which were never seen for the last 10 years. So this is one checkpoint inhibitor. The second checkpoint inhibitor is when the active T cell attacks the tumor cell. So T cell has a programmed death1 ligand, PD1 ligand on it, which binds to PDL1. I mean, it has a program to the PD programmed cell receptor. So for T cell to kill the cancer cell, this uh, this interaction needs this interaction should not take place. It inhibits the activation of killing of T cell, killing of tumor cell by the T cell. So here, so now we have inhibitors which inhibit the PD1, that is the pembrolizumab and nivolumab, and PDL1, atezolizumab. At this is another checkpoint for so that this interaction can take place, so that T cell is able to kill the tumor cell. For this, Professor Honjo from Japan shared the Nobel Prize with Dr. Paul Ellison for this discovery of PD1 and PDL1. So this was the mechanism how it works. Now the drugs, now the evidence on it. It was the KEYNOTE-119, which randomized 622 patients to pembrolizumab 200 mg 3 weekly versus chemotherapy. Chemotherapy was any chemotherapy, any single chemotherapy given. Now how they defined one more term, that was combined positive score. Combined positive score is all the cells which express PDL1 activity, be it tumor cells, lymphocytes, macrophages, or any other cell, divided by total number of cells in that particular field into 100 is the combined positive score. So the primary endpoint of the study was overall survival in those patients whose combined positive score is more than 1% and combined positive score is more than 10%. And secondary endpoints for progression-free survival and overall survival. We did not find any significance between combined positive score of 1% and 10%. However, on post-hoc analysis, they found that patients with combined positive score of 20 or more, that means they were highly positive for PDL1, did show significant activity in favor of pembrolizumab. Otherwise, there was no difference between their main endpoint, which are CPS 1 and 10%. There was no difference either in PFS or overall survival. But however, CPS 20% showed significant benefit in both the endpoints. But overall response rate of pembrolizumab in breast cancer was considered around 23-25%, which was not up to the mark. Also because of the reason which was said that the tumors might be immune cell deficient. If there are no immune cells, there is no point of that PD1 and PDL1 interaction taking place, which is going to benefit the patient. So now there are two things which are known to increase the lymphocyte or known to increase the immune cells in the tumor region. One is chemotherapy and second are PARP inhibitor. So this was the basis of the next trial, which was just published maybe early 2019. That is the IM PASSION trial. It combined atezolizumab with nab-paclitaxel versus nab-paclitaxel alone. So again, a randomized phase 3 trial of 51 patients, metastatic triple-negative breast cancers. The primary endpoint was progression-free survival and overall survival. So they again divided the results into two parts. One was intention to treat. That means all the patients who enrolled in the trial were evaluated. And second, only those who were PD1 positive. So the atezolizumab arm showed significant benefit in PFS in the intention to treat as well as the PD1 arm, but there was no significance in intention to treat group in the overall survival arm. So it just showed that patients who were PD1 positive, there was significant benefit of giving immunotherapy with chemotherapy. Now this is the third type. This is the luminal androgen receptor type. Now estrogen receptor and progesterone receptors are also androgen receptors. I mean, they are also steroid receptors, and they are luminal types. This luminal androgen receptor means it is similar to ER/PR positive receptor, but it responds to the androgens rather than estrogen or progesterone. These are again steroid receptors, and in some studies have shown that it is present in up to 90% in all breast cancers, but it varies according to the presence of ER status. So these are steroid receptors. They can work by two ways. That is the genomic pathway and one is the non-genomic pathway. Genomic pathway means these receptors are uh, uh, they're present in the cytosol, and uh, the drug comes, it attaches to the receptor in the cytosol, and the combination goes into the nucleus where it interacts with the DNA to lead the downstream pathway. Similarly, in the non-genomic pathways, it's not clear how it works, but proposed mechanisms are through the mTOR pathway or PI3 kinase pathway. Again, various mechanisms have been proposed, but it's not clear. It's like hypoxia-induced factor, recruitment of cytotoxic cells in the tumor environment, PARP and BRCA co-activators of AR receptors, and matrix metalloproteinases to prevent metastasis. So now the evidence of this is still building up. Most of it is still in the phase 2 stage of trials. So this was a single arm study, phase 2 study by Buccal et al., which ER negative progesterone receptor negative patients, 424 patients, out of these 51 tested positive for androgen receptor. They were given bicalutamide 150 mg OD till unacceptable toxicity. The endpoint of the study was, primary endpoint was 24 weeks clinical benefit ratio. And now the clinical benefit ratio is usually a phase 2 endpoint, which means that when we give a drug, either the disease, partial response, complete response, or stable disease at a particular time interval is called clinically benefit response. So primary endpoint was 24-week clinical benefit ratio. PFS was 12 weeks, and the drug was well tolerated. So the second was by Trena et al. That was similar on similar lines. The drug used was enzalutamide. Total number was 118. Out of total number was N was 118. But out of which 89 patients, that is 54%, had androgen receptor of more than 10% expression. Again, it was single arm study. Primary endpoint was clinical benefit ratio at 16 weeks, which was 33%, and median PF was 2.9. Now, this is a phase 3 trial recruiting at present. It's a 3-arm study: enzalutamide plus paclitaxel, and placebo plus paclitaxel. Primary endpoint and progression-free survival. The results are still awaited. Now, this is the last in the lot, that is the mesenchymal and the mesenchymal stem-like. This is the least studied amongst the 4. So there are only proposed hypotheses as how this works is the mesenchymal cell types. These are usually resistant to chemotherapy. They are bad biology. Metastasize very early to lymph nodes and systemically. So the possible mechanism of actions are cells which have more chances of epithelial mesenchymal transition, cancer stem cell like CD44 positive and epithelial cell adhesion molecule positive. CD44 is a marker for hyaluronase, which is present in the cell membrane. Then aldehyde dehydrogenase based mechanism, which is responsible for its chemotherapy resistance, various multi-drug resistant proteins, and anti-apoptotic proteins. Lot of pathways which are under study: Notch signaling pathway, WNT-bcatenin, HOP pathway, TGF-beta signaling pathway. And most of the trials for mesenchymal-like are phase 1 or early phase 2 trials with no molecule which has come into the clinical scenarios so far. So to summarize, I would say we have 4 types: basal-like, immune-mediated, luminal androgen receptor type, and mesenchymal type. In basal-like, you can divide it. There are 2 clinical targets we have. Drugs we have. One is one of the PARP inhibitors, and second is sensitive carboplatin. In immune-mediated type, again we have pembrolizumab or atezolizumab with nab-paclitaxel. In luminal androgen receptor type, we have bicalutamide and enzalutamide, and mesenchymal cell like or mesenchymal stem cell like is still under investigation.
Thank you, Tarun. The topic is now open for discussion.
Yeah, in your clinical practice, which of these four subtypes show the best prognosis for what you have seen in your clinical practice? Vanderbilt basal like one, immune mediated, LAR, or mesenchymal subtype?
So, I mean, right now, see, this has not come into a guideline. So it is. I mean, I agree there are four subtypes, but in my routine practice, we are not getting subtyping of triple negative breast cancer.
At present, there is no recommendation to actually get it done.
Dr. Tarun, that was a very well presented presentation actually. My question to you, because you presented all this immunotherapy and this very nicely, is there is recent thing coming up regarding tumor infiltrating lymphocytes in triple negative breast cancer, CD8 and TREG ratio, which is T regulatory cells ratio. So before treatment and after chemotherapy. So would you please update us on that also?
See, the concept, its concept is the same, I tell you. If you remember the figure which I showed, it's either you allow the T lymphocytes to interact with the tumor cells, or you allow the antigen presenting cells to interact with the T lymphocytes and help them get activated, or you inject already activated T lymphocytes in the body to take care of the tumor cells. So the concept arises from there itself. But on the research module, this is an older concept than the immunotherapy at present. So maybe there are some studies which are coming out at present, but immunotherapy is less toxic and supposedly more effective than injecting T lymphocytes or tumor-infiltrated TIL.
So you would choose those patients after chemotherapy who still have a CD8 high and low TREG low for immunotherapy. Probably they may respond better to the immunotherapy.
Yeah, that's true.
Sir, one more question. Dr. Tarun. In triple negative breast cancer, once you have whether it's early or whether it's locally advanced breast cancer, would you, once you get a IHC pre-treatment of triple negative breast cancer, would you give a systemic chemotherapy first, or would you like operate them and go ahead with the systemic therapy thereafter? Because we know that pathological complete response is a prognostic marker for triple negative.
Oh, see, there are two things to it. Though pathological complete response is a prognostic marker for triple negative breast cancers, but in the luminal subtype, I mean, in spite of the pathological cure, the luminal subtypes were better than triple negative. So one that should be remembered. And second thing is what you asked. See, like the two trials I had mentioned, which had given carboplatin, these were actually in the neoadjuvant setting, and they showed there were better pathological cure, pathological complete response with carboplatin being added in the neoadjuvant setting. But all said and done, this is still in the trials setup. It's not come into standard guidelines. So I would say in my clinical practice, I would still go ahead with as we do it for any other breast cancer, whether the breast patient demands a breast conservation or no, and do I need to downstage the disease for breast conservation? That will be my only criteria for giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy, rather than it being triple negative and me giving chemotherapy because it's triple negative.
Sir, in my clinical practice here, because we are not able to place the clips, so if you are going to do a breast conserving surgery, so that places a dilemma for us, because young patients with triple negative, so we may discuss with the patient that they are triple negative, and because we are not able to place the clips, so they may end up with mastectomy rather than breast conserving. So I don't know how in your clinical setup, I know that you're placing clips regularly for all your patients. So in my clinical practice, that's a problem for us, that if we are going to give a good cosmetic outcome after a breast conserving, even in triple negative, sometimes we go ahead with the surgery first if it's a breast conserving therapy.
So that is fine, absolutely fine if you're going ahead with the surgery first also. I mean, if you've done a breast conservation and then you're giving all the adjuvant chemotherapy, that's absolutely fine. There is no, I agree the breast conservation rates do increase if all the cycles of chemotherapy are given in the neoadjuvant setting. But overall survival is not affected whether the new chemotherapy has been given in a neoadjuvant setting or in an adjuvant setting.
What are the subgroup of patients in which AR, bicalutamide can be given? What are the subsets of the patient?
This is it's very initial stage for it, but for triple negative breast cancers, based on the evidence we have, you can get a luminal androgen receptor done, and if it's positive, you can start with it. I mean, it's again, you explain to the patient that this is on experimental basis.
So the androgen receptor, is it done along with the ERPR? The androgen receptor status, so is it done along with the ERPR, the IHC that we?
Routinely, it's not done. You'll have to ask the pathologist to do it in case you want.
Thank you.
TNBC kind of disease, you agreed and you also told that there are more chances of visceral and CNS metastasis. On that, the same thing, would you like to have chemotherapy introduced earlier rather than doing a surgery? That was Dr. Anshika's question. I think it that way. Is the TNBC in some way or other, and a HER2 positive disease like we introduced trastuzumab as soon as possible? Do we have to introduce chemotherapy as early as possible? What is your take on that?
If you give chemotherapy first and the patient responds, clinical complete response, like it was presented at ASCO this year, it is a prognostic marker. I agree, but doing a mastectomy or a breast conservation initially and then starting chemo, I mean, I don't think you waste a lot of time in this. So I would say that triple negative is not a criteria to give neoadjuvant chemotherapy or start chemotherapy first or in the adjuvant setting.
But sir, you may lose. But you may lose on the most important prognostic marker in triple negative breast cancer if you operate first. If you give neoadjuvant and then you operate, then you probably can look at the PCR or no PCR rate. So we may lose on that particular prognostic marker.
So I'm Dr. Rohit, sir. I'm a BM resident in medical oncology. So the reason why, I mean, in our institute we have shifted to neoadjuvant chemotherapy in triple negative is because of the data from CREATE-X. So I totally accept the fact that it is only a single study that has actually shown benefit, but then the benefit of both DFS and overall survival is that significant when we get the PCR data after giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy. That is, in patients who do not achieve PCR, we have actually started giving them adjuvant capecitabine. So giving 6 months of adjuvant capecitabine actually has shown, I think, a PFS benefit of almost 15%, and I think an 8 to 9% overall survival benefit at 3 years. And as we know, triple negative breast cancers, the biology of the disease is such that if they fail in 3 years, or they don't fail at all, unlike ER positive cancers, which can fail even 20, 30 years later. So why we decided and why I would say that a very good point in giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy is that PCR not just guides us as a prognostic marker, it also helps us select adjuvant chemotherapy post surgery. So I think that is, and that trial needs to be discussed although it's just one trial, there's nothing else that agrees with it. And in the trials that have been done previously, they did not agree with it again because there was some ERPR positive cancers. But in this triple negative subset, having a 15% DFS benefit, 8% OS benefit at 3 years is quite significant. So that is something that is why we are giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy in triple negative. So yeah, and even there's one more study, the Brightness trial, where actually it's a phase 3 study that has used carboplatin and velaparib in the neoadjuvant setting. So they found that giving paclitaxel carboplatin, they given weekly paclitaxel and carboplatin given every 3 weeks, and then followed it with the adriamycin cyclophosphamide based chemotherapy. So in this particular study, also adding carboplatin actually gave a 25% increase in the PCR rates. So since we know that PCR is a secondary endpoint, by biology, knowing that these patients, if you get a 50-60% PCR rate, at least you know that these patients are going to relatively well. And, that would actually, in the clinical practice, that's what a patient wants to know. When will my disease come back? So I think that's why we would actually prefer this whole neoadjuvant thing in case of triple negative. So there's the carboplatin data, which is phase 3. And then, of course, there's Createx, which is again phase 3. So considering this, I think that's just that was how we decided on our.
I think the brightness study is for the stage 2 and 3 patients, those who are not a candidate for the breast conservative surgery, but we want to convert into the breast conservative surgery. So there they've got a PCR of almost 53%, and they converted the patient into the conservation, but which was previously not for the breast conservative surgery. I mean, not the candidate for the conservation.
CPS more than 20, whether they have tried only immunotherapy or they have used combination of immuno plus chemo.
CPS more than 20, there are two different trials. CPS more than 20 was considered, it was in the keynote trial, and immunotherapy with chemo was in the IAM Passion trial. So CPS more than 20, secondly, CPS more than 20 was not the endpoint of the trial itself. So present recommendation is to use with chemotherapy.
Sir, there was a recent publication and study where they said that if a drug or chemo in cancer or any other, if the drug costs more than 20 times your GDP of your country, then the number needed to treat NNT is so big that sometimes you're not able to use it in a clinically meaningful way in your country. So probably that's why all of us are a little behind on using immunotherapy in our country.
Yeah, most of the people in our country are not able to afford it until unless they are from reimbursement backgrounds. So that is always one of the reasons. I'll thank all the audiences for their participation.